Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started, and then if people jump on, that'll be fine. So I want to talk about a few things from last week and previous work. So I'm finally getting through your facing it paragraphs, and I'm trying something different on it, which I think is going to be good. I'm using Moat to give you voice notes on it, and so you may have to add that extension. You should be able to find it easily if it doesn't let you hear it without downloading that extension. But it'll just be a private comment in your document with, I think the length of it's like 1.5 minutes. So you'll understand why you got the score that you got when you get your grade. And then the next thing is your group work. I have been really impressed overall with people that I've talked to and the feedback that I've seen with how well you're working together. You have some options if you're having difficulty, and there's kind of some benefits to one of them. So some of you have already created Google Hangouts to meet with your groups, and if that's working for you, whatever's working for you, keep doing it. But if something's not working, you have the Google Hangouts option that you could create. You have the link from way back in September from when you first met with your group. You can use that Google Meet. And the cool thing about Google Meets now with one of the updates to it is I can see who has been in each Google Meets, like an attendance report. So I can see like if group members aren't showing up. So if like 3 people are there and the 4th one isn't there, I can see that. And I can also, like after today's class, I'll see who all was on here and for how long. So it's really helpful information. Let's see. What else before we move on? In your work this week, you have a choice of working with a partner or working alone. And whatever you choose this week will be what you're also doing next week. So this week you're planning for an essay, and then next week you're writing the essay. And I did it that way. I almost had them both scheduled this week, but I did it that way so you can get some feedback. Really all I'm looking for is like any red flags in your planning process, kind of like I did with your facing it point sentence. So like if I see something really out of whack with like your thesis or whatever, and the evidence that you're choosing to support it, I'll let you know that before you start writing your essay. Back to that, like choosing your partner or working alone. I know I already wrote this in the assignment and everything. Choose wisely. I know it's tempting to choose someone that's your buddy or that you know, but you need to think about your grade. This is your essay will be a big grade. And so, like I said, choose wisely. What's going to be best for you in your finished product that you're turning in? Are you going to be the one doing all the work? You're going to be relying on someone else to do the work, and just because they're doing the work doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing a good job. And so choose wisely. When you choose if you're going to work with someone, who you're going to work with. Okay, so I'm going to pull up your assignment for this week. Well, no, not that one. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. As usual, you have the agenda, kind of like what you need to do first, next, last for the week. You have the materials for the quiz that you're going to have at the end of class today, or at the end of this lesson, I should say. We won't take the whole period. And then you have the planning document that's going to be due, and you have your usual independent reading. So we're going to look at the planning document. This is meant to kind of force you to analyze more than you might do on your own. So it's meant to take you through more steps than you might do on your own so that your analysis is more in-depth than it could be. Okay, so you'll notice there's 2 slides. The first one is figurative language, and the second one is diction. Actually, I'm going to take a step back first. I totally forgot about showing you something. So this is everything that's in the assignment. Really, the only thing you're turning in this week is the flow chart. I gave you a little bit more than what you need. The Google Slides has the prompt, and it has materials that you'll need next week when you're writing your essay. And then here is the place that you'll write your essay, but you don't really need that this week. So all you're turning in this week is the flow chart, and when you open it, it should automatically create a copy with your name. But what I do want to show you from the slides is the prompt. So your prompt is, read the following poem, Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. Then, in a well-developed essay, discuss how the speaker uses literary devices to show his attitude toward war. So if you just look at the prompt and think of the facing it prompt, what are some things that are similar or different from the prompt from facing it that you could, it's been a little while since you've looked at that one, but does anything stand out to you that's different about this prompt?
Oh, okay. So it's the same thing. We're still talking about literary devices that they're using, but instead of just creating an atmosphere or tone, it's about showing the author's attitude towards something.
Right, which the attitude really is tone, but it's telling you it's specifically towards war. So what is his attitude towards war? This is also a little bit different from this part right here from the first one you had. In facing it, it specifically said diction and figurative language. So this is a little more what an AP prompt might look like, where it just says like the techniques the speaker uses or the literary devices the speaker uses, and then it's up to you to determine which ones. Although I'm going to tell you which ones in this case, but I wanted you to see like what a prompt might look more like, where it's not going to give you specifically what you should be looking at in the poem or in the piece of literature. The other hopefully obvious thing is this is an essay, so it's multi-paragraph. It's not a one PEA-EA-R a graph, and so that's a little bit different. Those are the kind of the things to look for when you get a prompt, is like, what is it asking me to write about? It's always going to be asking you to look at like the techniques. And then what you're looking at is attitude towards war. So those are kind of the two important things to keep in the back of your mind when you are working on your planning. The next thing is just your thesis sentence, which you should notice this looks a lot like a point sentence. Your thesis sentence is what your whole essay is going to be proving. And then when you go to this document, there's a place here for your thesis sentence in both sides, or both slides. And the reason it's there is because, remember, everything you write about needs to prove that sentence. So it's at the top of that page in yellow so that you're going back to that always. Everything you write about should go back to prove that thesis sentence. Okay. So let's look at this. Now we know we're thinking about his attitude towards war. On this side, you're only going to write about figurative language. And on slide 2, you're only going to write about diction. Okay, so when we're looking at figurative language here, it says 2 strong examples of figurative language in chronological order. That just means the order that they appear in the poem. So you want to, both in this planning document and in your essay, write about them in the order they appear, because you're making a case for how he creates or develops or builds his attitude towards war. So like maybe your first example here is from line 3, and then this one is from line 29 or whatever, so that they're in the order that they appear in the poem. Okay, so right here, this first bubble says what type of figurative language. So is it a simile? Is it a metaphor? Is it personification? What is it? Same thing over here. Tell me what these examples here are examples of. And I know I've told you this before. It's really not that important that you can tell me it's personification or that you can tell me it's a metaphor. Just because you can label it or identify it isn't as important as you being able to explain that it's a comparison, for example. If it's a metaphor, it's a comparison between two unlike things and how that comparison is effective in creating his attitude towards war. So I'm asking you to put that in the bubble there, but it's really not that important when you're writing your essay to be able to just like name drop literary terms. That doesn't really help you a whole lot. Okay, the next thing is, what's the literal meaning and context? This is a big thing I've seen in all of the writing that I'm looking at, is you need to assume that your reader, although you know it's me, you need to assume that your reader has not read this piece that you're analyzing. You don't need to give them the whole rundown of everything that the poem covers, but you need to give them a little bit of context around each quote that you use. So I know, like when he says, I'm going to use Facing It for an example. When he says, my name in letters like smoke or something, you'd need to give some context of he's looking at the wall that is black, the letters are gray, and this is what he comments on, so that your reader has some idea of where that is in the poem and what they're referencing. And that goes along with what I call quote bombs. Some of you may have seen that in some of your other work, where like you just drop the quote in there and you don't explain it, you don't weave it or embed it into your own sentence. You're not going to worry about it on this document so much, but when you get into writing your essay, you'll have to have that context. Okay, so you're giving context here. What does it literally mean? And then also, what's the figurative meaning? So what is the literal comparison, for example, if it's a metaphor, and then what's the figurative meaning of that comparison? And then the next thing here is connecting it back to the prompt. This is something I'm seeing in a lot of writing also, is yes, you're telling me the literal and figurative meaning, but then you've got to go to the next step and connect it back to your thesis, connect it back to the prompt. How does it create that attitude? How does that specific example create that attitude or help develop that? This last part down here at the bottom is really to help you when you get to your conclusion. It's to give you kind of like forcing you again to think through what relevance the text might have, like how does it connect to society or mankind in general. Like this is where you're going beyond the text with that specific example, and you'll use that later on in your conclusion. All right, let's look at the diction side. This is a side, I say side because I'm used to it being a two-sided piece of paper. This is the slide that people usually have the most questions about. So you'll notice it says select 3 examples of loaded diction, again in chronological order, writing them in the circles. So here's your thesis again. You'll notice I made uses red because I'm hoping you come up with something better than uses. And then you're going to tell me what kind of diction it is. Is it loaded? Is it powerful? Is it something? Because diction just means word choice. So if you say he uses word choice, well, it's a poem, of course he uses word choice. But what kind of word choice? You should have some kind of descriptor for the diction. And then figurative language. So I put this in red. You need to name his attitude. You don't have to follow this exact structure, but those components need to be in your thesis. Those are all the things you need to cover in your thesis. Okay, so moving on to diction. You'll notice it says 3 examples. Why do you think you need 3 examples as opposed to like 1 example? Anybody have ideas? Or maybe even as opposed to 2 examples. So if you're trying to say that Wilfred Owen uses loaded diction to create, we'll say, a horrified attitude or something like that. If you just use 1 word example, does that really make a strong case for him creating a revealing a horrified attitude? It's just 1 word in the whole poem? No. So you really need to have like 3, like this makes a strong case for that he is deliberate with his choice of words to create that tone. That's why you need more than just one or two examples. And remember that diction is individual word choice. It's not a phrase. It's not a whole sentence. It's the individual word. So, for example, if I walked into the room and I said, I'm really happy to be here today, versus walking into the room and saying, I am ecstatic to be here today. You have a much different impression of like how glad I am to be there, right? And that's individual word choice. So it's that happy versus ecstatic. So you're looking for individual, usually descriptors, but not always, individual words that have a lot more connotative meaning to them, that have a lot more feeling or thought associated with them, to help create whatever his attitude is. So in those examples, it shouldn't be a whole sentence. It might be a couple of words, like a really short phrase, 2 to 3 words, and then, but you're only talking about one of those words, as his choice of diction that made the difference. Okay, so then in this square here, you're looking at the denotation of each word. That's just the dictionary definition. You did this when you looked at My Mother Pieced Quilts. And so, and notice it says in the context of the passage, because sometimes words have more than one definition. You need to have the definition as it's used in the passage. Connotation, here's where you're starting to go to connecting it to your thesis and the attitude. What do we associate with those words? So beyond just the dictionary definition, what are the feelings and thoughts that we associate with those words? And again, that's kind of like why you chose it, why or how it reveals the attitude. And then the next piece, the abstractions down here, what larger meaning might the words have on the text? So here's where you're going, like you're starting to connect it back to your point again. What's the implication or inference? Why this word specifically? So why or how does that word specifically connect back to your thesis? So you see how like it's a kind of a 3-step process. It's making you look at each individual word. And I promise that will help you for those of you who were really struggling with analysis or light on your commentary of your examples. This will help you go through that and get deeper in your analysis. Whoops. And then the last part here, again, is connecting it back to the prompt. How do these reveal the attitude? Which is very similar to this here, but it's just kind of like asking you to, like, for all of those words together, how do they create that attitude? And you could use that possibly in your, you could use it to wrap up your diction paragraph, or you could use it in your conclusion as well. It's kind of helping you or forcing you to think through it again. So both of these slides are meant to like have you break down each example farther than what you would probably, maybe not all of you, but what you might do on your own. It's giving you a process, some steps to go through to make you look at your examples in detail. Okay, so this slide here, these slides are all that's due this week, well, plus your reading journal prompt. That's what's due this week. You're going to use this to create your essay for next week. So if you do this well and completely and everything, really, you shouldn't have to look at the poem again next week. You should just have to look at these slides and be able to write your essay from this. Let me see. Before we move on, next week when you do your essay also, I will give you an example essay, like one that's strong so you can see how it's organized. It won't be over the same poem, but just so you can look at how it's organized, how it flows and all of that, and see kind of an exemplar of a strong literary analysis essay, complete essay. So we're going to take your quiz here in a minute. But before we move on to that, does anyone have questions about this document or anything else that you're working on this week? No? Okay, so you're turning this in this week. You can work with a partner or you can work alone, and just put in the private comments for the assignment whether you're working with a partner and who, if you are, or whether you're working alone. I'll tell you, I already cautioned you on like who to work with and all of that. Somebody asked in the other class about how do you break up if you're writing an essay with someone? Like, how do you make that work? That's really up to you and your partner. You're basically writing a 4-paragraph essay. You've got your intro, your figurative language paragraph, your diction paragraph, and your conclusion. So like, you could each do 2 paragraphs, but you have to be careful about it flowing and the style and it being really obvious or disjointed when the writer changes. So you have to be careful about that. Maybe you write your introduction together and your conclusion together, and one person does the body paragraph 1 and the other does body paragraph 2. It's up to you if you want to work with someone, how you're going to do that. Just make sure the paper as a whole is cohesive. Okay. So we're going to move on to your quiz. I keep feeling like I've forgotten something else, but we'll move on to your quiz. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to email you the quiz. It's going to take me a second because I'm only emailing it to the people that are here. So I'm going to email you the quiz, and then I'm going to open up GoGuardian, and it's going to open up video in GoGuardian so I can see you and see your screen. And so you can close out Google Meet. I will be here in Google Meet when you finish. If you have questions or want to talk to me about anything, I'll be